I'd be lying if I said the Jets weren't in some trouble against the Colorado Avalanche, but against all odds, there is still a path through. We'll talk about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thanks so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support so much. Now, I know yesterday I had planned to do a partial episode or like a partial recap. I just figured I'd wait till the end of the game and try and talk through it, which it's a good thing I did because by the time the game finally closed and the final whistle was blown, wasn't a fun evening, and I definitely needed some time today to cool off after honestly just walking away pretty pissed. And it wasn't just, frustrations on the ice or anything like that. I think, there's been some tension kind of boiling over for a lot of us watching Winnipeg kind of shoot itself in the foot. And in last night's game, it wasn't just the Jets. The officiating also kind of put Winnipeg in a real bad spot. And I think the Jets let frustration kind of get to them, and they made some really poor decisions that ultimately kind of just killed the team. We'll talk about what went wrong and what lessons the Jets can take from it in just a moment. Before we go any further, though, I did want to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I've got a competitive side, and I, as a big fan of Monopoly Go, I think it's perfect for you too because it's a great mobile take on a hit classic in Monopoly that lets you play with your friends or against them. And of course, you can find out more when we talk about Monopoly Go later this episode, so stay tuned for that. Right now, it's free on the App Store or Google Play, so go download it right now. Now, turning our attention back to a less fun topic with the Jets. Yeah, Game 3 was nothing short of a disaster. Winnipeg lost in very embarrassing fashion, 6-2, and it just felt like, that could be a series-ending loss. Or at least, let's be real, right? In the heat of the moment, I was probably saying that because I was pretty pissed at everything, and I think a lot of us probably need to step back from the ledge and look at things from a more holistic perspective. But even doing so, I think things are not feeling great. The Jets have generally been outplayed in all three games, and it's hard to take away positives when you've conceded 15 goals over 3 games. That's a lot. And I know that Hellebuck needs to be better, but the team in general has just been pretty much doggy doo-doo. And it's not like there haven't been moments where the Jets have shown some good quality play. I think in this third game, I saw more decent 5v5 stuff than we've generally seen in most of the series. And in fact, things were pretty close up until Winnipeg started getting into some penalty trouble. As soon as the Avs managed to tie this game 2-2, things really started to come off, or like the wheels really started to fall off. And then the Jets got themselves into a really bad spate of penalty calls. And you can definitely debate the merit of the actual calls themselves, right? There were some really ticky-tacky ones. And I think the Jets can probably feel a bit aggrieved that, especially in the second half of the game, some of the stuff that was called on Winnipeg was very clearly ignored by the referees. I think one of the most egregious things was a clear trip on Kyle Connor right in the slot. And then, just minutes later, after that, the Avs kind of take advantage and score. And, Gabriel Velarde, or I forget if it was Velarde or somebody else, who had the double minor from a high sticking that was a really, really ugly high sticking. There was a lot of blood. And so, all of that probably doesn't happen if the Jets get the power play that they actually deserve. And it could have been a chance to really put the game in Winnipeg's ball court. Because I think at that point, if memory serves me correct, the Jets were up 2-1 then. And then things really started to fall apart. So a really frustrating game. I really feel like, this one got away from Winnipeg very quickly. And look, I can't put all the blame on the refs, right? That's not true. The Jets ultimately have to be responsible for their actions, as Garrett Hull put very nicely in his article. But at the end of the day, right, the Jets just need to play better, and I think they need their stars to really step up. And so far, we haven't really seen a lot from some of their top players. Ehlers has been quiet. Scheifele's been quiet. Velarde's been okay. Connor has been, I would say, pretty good in a lot of ways. Much more engaged and much more active than I expected from KFC. This is maybe some of the most consistently engaged hockey I've ever seen him play for the Jets. So keep that up. And he's been pretty creative, but it's hard when, the rest of the team has kind of fallen short. Toffoli did score a goal, and it was a greasy and ugly one, but I think until that point, he was pretty much invisible. Monahan has been sort of okay, not great. And like for your top six, it's just not good enough, which is why when I see Cole Peretti sitting there on the bench, riding pine, not in the bench on the in the rink, rinkside, but certainly in the press box, I don't understand. This kid has like almost 20 goals this season, and quite frankly, the Jets miss both his offense and his defense. He's a smart player, and like Winnipeg's not a team that's built on speed, right? We all know that the Jets are kind of on the slower side. So if you're going to lean into that identity, don't worry necessarily about his mobility. He's, first off, not as slow as people think he is. And secondly, he does so many smart plays that actually make use of his lack, or perhaps not make use, but more bypass his lack of speed. He knows how to use his body and use his limitations and still get around them and still be an effective NHLer. So, for me, I kind of look to game 4, and I know he's not going to play, but I think to myself, if the Jets have another really bad outing in game 4, does Peretti draw back in? I really feel like this team desperately needs him. And it's wild that, a 38 point, 20-ish goal scorer is just sitting in the press box. No other team in the playoffs is doing this, by the way. Not one, I guarantee it. So very frustrating. And you just sort of factor that into a game in which, I'd say Morrissey was really good. And, the Jets, Hellebuck had been pretty decent. And like the Jets at 5v5 were pretty decent. But then things just spiraled out of control, and Winnipeg got embarrassed at the end of it. And to make all of this really, really sucky, Brendan Dillon got his hand cut in a post-game scrum, which, I mean, people will say, well, that's just useless and silly. Why did they do it? And it's just all the frustration just boils over, right? It's not really something that people intend to happen, but you're at a point where you've been basically getting your crap pushed in. So at some point you feel like you have to send a message. And I think the Jets made a mistake there, but it is what it is, right? The good news is it sounds like the cut is not too deep. It avoided any tendon or serious muscle. So he's actually listed as day-to-day. I don't think he's coming back tomorrow necessarily, but you know what? All the same, let's just hope that he heals up quickly and that he's able to hold a stick, because this team, quite frankly, really doesn't want to play without him. It would not be great. But one guy the Jets definitely need to figure out what to do with is Neil Pionk. Even by his standards, man, I'm not going to say much more than that. You know exactly what's on my mind. I feel bad for him because, I know that when he struggles like this, there are a few people who are harder on themselves on this team than Neil is. He knows he's struggling. I think he's trying to force things, and it's just not going well. And that concerns me for the rest of the series for as long as the Jets are in it, because Pionk is kind of a guy the team really trusts, and I'm not sure he even trusts himself at this point. So, yeah, a lot of things and a lot of thoughts swimming in my head from this loss, but the Jets basically have to dust themselves off immediately. And from their early practices, it does sound like the mood is still up because, you know what? They're only down 1-2 in the series. And considering how bad it could be, having that early home win has maybe given the Jets just a little bit of cushion to try and figure their crap out before they get back to Winnipeg on Tuesday. So we'll talk about game 4 in just a moment and what adjustments the Jets are seemingly planning to make and what they could also make in addition to those changes. But before we go any further, I did want to shout out our wonderful friends and partners at Indeed. When you're drafting your fantasy team, do you ever wish you could handpick the best stars for your business team too? If you're building your talented roster, you need to partner with Indeed. Indeed is a hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Don't spend hours on multiple job sites hunting for candidates when Indeed can bring them to you right to your doorstep as fast as possible. They have a great service that allows you to match, give assessments, and host virtual interviews. Again, all in one spot. If you hate waiting, Indeed's US data shows that over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches exactly what you need in the exact moment that they sponsor a job. It's super convenient. It's great. And as somebody who has personally used Indeed when I was looking for work a while back, I can attest to how easy it is. There's tons of different categories and keywords and different information markers that are great to help you get matched to a job that actually suits what you're looking for. And for employers, I think it's very convenient. You should join over 3 million businesses that already use Indeed to hire. And if you're ready to join, because guess what? We have some really great offers coming. Indeed knows that when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. And that's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must-have job requirements. Visit Indeed.com/lockedon to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing is not available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Hello, Jets fans, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for joining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting about some post-game 3 blues. I know a lot of us were probably not feeling great about it, if I'm being honest. I know I myself was kind of pissed. I had to kind of step away from the game, and, I just stopped thinking about the Jets for at least a few hours today. But, of course, Winnipeg has an early afternoon game. Oh, yeah, it's going to be fun, right? I can imagine that there's going to be some drama. We're not even sure what the lineup is going to look like because there may be 1 or 2 changes. We'll talk about those in just a moment, but before we go too much further, just wanted to let you know something really cool that, might be up your alley if you're a Fox Sports or ESPN watcher. If you find yourself having to turn both of those programs down because of, tons of shouting, you should make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you all the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Be sure to follow Locked On Sports Today, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, like I said, Game 4, look, this is kind of a must-win for the Jets. I think after I said yesterday or the previous game was kind of a must-win-ish, look, the Jets really need to pull this one off. I think Winnipeg absolutely needs to, go for broke here, right? Winnipeg has kind of sat back. They've kind of given too much space and time to the Avs and sort of respected them a little bit. And I think that is a bit of a problem, right? Winnipeg didn't get to the playoffs by being a team that, allows their opponents to breathe. In some games they have, and that's where Hellebuyck has kind of filled in the gaps. But where Hellebuyck is kind of struggling this series, you have to find a way to create more offense and hem the opponent in. And that's where the Avs have really cut the Jets apart, because not only do they thrive off of rush chances, but they're also really good at doing like a lot of in-zone high to low plays where, the point shots and tips and deflections just seemingly give the Jets absolute fits. I don't know why Winnipeg is so bad at dealing with this, but it seems like every single point shot from Makar feels like it's going to go in. I got to be honest. It either feels like it's directly going in, it's getting tipped, or it's creating a rebound that somebody else pounces on and capitalizes on. And that's not to say that Makar isn't capable of doing this. He's amazing when he's healthy, but let's be real, right? The Jets just have to be better and smarter about how they, attacks time and space and take it away from the Avs. I think Colorado has been given far too much to work with. I think what made the Jets so effective earlier this year was being able to roll those 4 lines by cutting off the neutral zone and keeping the action in one end of the ice, where Winnipeg hasn't been able to do that at all this series. They've tried to bully the Avs. They've tried to be patient and sit back. Neither of those options have worked. Now it's time to go a little more full court press and force the Avs to be the one that's making the riskier plays and passes. Because if you can force Colorado into mistakes, guess what? This team is not as good as they've looked. I think that they have an amazing offense, but that's when you allow them to. If you take away their time and space like the Jets did in the week before the postseason, Colorado is more vulnerable than they look. And I think Georgiev hasn't looked all that impressive to me, even in his recent performances. I think that there's still a way to get past him. And, the Jets have some legit firepower to kind of force him into some bad situations or some stuff where maybe you can plant a seed of doubt in his game. I will say that the Jets did call up Axel Janssen-Fjallby, and it sounds like he's already hit the ice earlier today. Can't say that that makes me feel great. I would also kind of say, I just mentioned Peretti earlier. If I was Cole and I was sitting in the press box watching AGF kind of get a roster spot instead of me on the ice, I'd be a little bit upset. I won't lie. I think, as much as I love Axel, right? He's a fun forechecking player. He's fast and speedy, and maybe he'll actually be a good fit for the series. But to have a guy who has almost scored 40 points sitting in the press box instead, and you bring in AJF to try and solve your forward problems, I don't know. That seems to me to send a negative message, and I don't love that, but we'll see if they actually go with him tomorrow. I do think AJF could help the fourth line a bit. He's a very direct player in the way that Brandon Tanev was, and maybe that's what's needed, right? A fast forechecking player who can pretty much skate up the ice and create some rush counters and stuff. I don't hate the decision to put him in. I just don't know why we're also not seeing Peretti. So some frustration there, but Dillon may also be out for this game. In fact, I would actually expect him to. I can't imagine he's about to play with his hand just being stitched up freshly. So Logan Stanley probably drawing in. I can't say I love that either. I would much prefer to have an arrangement where you've got Morrissey and DeMello, Sandberg and Pionk, and like Schmidt and Miller or something. I think you can probably get away with that group instead of trying to put Stanley back in. But I think the Jets are going to do that, and I think we're going to see that it's not going to work. I know that Bones just benched Stanley to begin with, but that was after a couple of games, and I feel like it's not going to be a decision he sticks with for long. I feel like he's going to put Logan back in, and we're going to be back to where we were before, which sucks because Sandberg and Schmidt actually had really strong games last outing. So I feel like, this coaching staff has struggled to take the right lessons from the series, and I think that is going to be a recurring theme if the Jets get out of this first round. And that is a big if. I'll be honest. I know it's only a 1-2 series deficit, but as 70% of teams that win game one have usually gone on to win the series, so too do teams that win game three of a split series like we had in, coming into game three. So Colorado right now has all the momentum, has all of the advantage. And I think for the Jets, they have still some vibes left. I think there's still some real fighting spirit, but I do question what happens in this game four. It's an earlier game, an afternoon game. Traditionally, I haven't seen the Jets do all that well in those outings. And I think if you're Winnipeg, you really need to come out with a big statement game and remind, not only the fans, but also just the team itself, you're capable of playing this well. This is what you can do. You need to get back to the basics and play the game that got you to the postseason in the first place. Playoff hockey, there may be some changes tactically to how space is used, but the Avs really haven't changed their game. They're still just as lethal as they were in the regular season. So it's incumbent upon the Jets to get back to the formula that made them successful so that they can be the ones to dictate the terms when Game 5 rolls into Winnipeg. There is still tons of time to turn the series around. I know I've been a little bit defeatist in some of my social media postings, and, maybe it's a little bit premature, but given how the team has played, I also think that there's pretty good reason to be concerned. But like I said, there is time to turn it around, and it starts with a big Game 4 win. If you can do that, if you can start to plant seeds of doubt in Colorado's mind, things are going to feel a lot better coming back home, because then you've got a best of three, and guess what? The Jets have home ice advantage, so that is a big thing. Winnipeg really should be focused on forcing 7 games now, or if they can do it in 6 games, hey, that's amazing. But let's just start off with the basics and get through Game 4 first. But longer term, I thought it might also be worth talking about the future of the Jets beyond the season, because obviously whether the Jets win the series or get knocked out, there are some big lingering questions about leadership coming up next season and who should be behind the bench. And I think it might be time for the Jets to make a bit of a change. We'll talk about all of that in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, like I said earlier, just wanted to revisit our friends at Monopoly Go. I've been told that I'm a competitive person, and, for those of you who are gamers or play board games or really any sort of sport, maybe you're like me and you enjoyed a little bit of backyard football. sometimes you can take the energy a little bit too far, and maybe you need something to channel it, right? If you've got a great competitive side and want to have fun, I highly recommend that you check out Monopoly Go. If you've heard of it, you know that it's a great free mobile app that takes the classic game and gives it a fresh spin. You can play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you the spoils of victory. But the best part, though, is messing around with your friends. You can charge them rent on iconic properties, and you can also heist and steal their vaults for riches, because who doesn't love a little bit of extra spending money? And of course, if you're the really competitive type and you want to rub those leaderboards in your friends' faces, this is a great way to do it. But it's also not just a competitive side. You also can have a cooperative side where you team up with friends and others around the world in timed tournaments to earn huge rewards. Get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go free on the App Store or Google Play. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's closing thoughts, as we are just wrapping up with some interesting considerations ahead of game 4 tomorrow, but I'm thinking a little bit longer term, right? I think, not only this season and the past season, but the playoffs as well. I think we've seen a need for a new voice behind the Jets bench. I love Rick Bowness. I think in a lot of ways he deserves a ton of credit for what he has accomplished. And, regardless of how this season ends, I'll always be thankful for him stepping in after Maurice left. And I think he's done, a really good job of restoring confidence in the Jets. And I think that's something that really can't be overstated. This team, when Maurice left, was a broken mess. There's no getting around it. The ashes of his departure, it stank to the high heavens. And Bones stepped in, and immediately you got a sense that the vibes were starting to come back. And look, it does kind of paper over some of the tactical issues. And I think those tactical issues have started to really reflect themselves in this postseason run. But on the whole, if I look back on this, the past couple of years, I would generally be happy with the results. I think Bones came in to be a stabilizing force, and he has done that. I think it's now time for the Jets to figure out what the next step is, because you've got a crop of really talented, interesting young prospects who are going to start joining the league here, and you've also got some veterans who you kind of have to figure out the future with. And I think if you're the Jets, this is actually a good handing off point, because Bones does have a team option, or it might be his option. I forget which it is. But honestly, with all of the personal issues that he's had and the fact that this was always supposed to be a temporary arrangement, I think it might be time for the Jets to maybe transition over to Scott Arniel. I don't know if Arniel is the best candidate for this job. He's shown some interesting flashes and promising signs. I think he could be an interesting candidate to give maybe next season to. And if it doesn't work out, maybe you try something else. But all that said, I think it's just time for the Jets to think about making the change. Let Rick have this last playoff run, and then perhaps it'll be time for him to retire. I think he's had a really legendary storied career. He's been around for multiple iterations of the Jets. I think this is, about as great a career as you could possibly have. And I'll be thankful for what he's accomplished here. Despite all my gripes and frustrations, I still think that the choice to hire him ended up working out pretty well. Maybe Trotz would have been a better selection. Maybe he would have gotten the Jets further, but I think for what Winnipeg needed, Bones ended up fitting the bill nicely. But like I said, at the end of the season, I think it's probably time to part ways. I also think the Jets definitely need to change over the special teams coaching staff. Despite the power play being a little bit better recently, it really shouldn't be reliant on Gabriel Vilardi to solve everything, because when Vilardi is off the ice or the second power play unit is off the ice, it's a lot less effective, right? So for me, that has to change. The penalty kill, it's just bad. I don't know how else to describe it. It's just really awful. And unfortunately, it's played a huge role in the series against the Avs. I know that we usually say there are fewer penalties called in the playoffs, but that has not been the case for this Jets-Avs series. I didn't realize this, but the Jets had 9 penalties assessed to them in the last game. That just never really happens. And it really, unfortunately, swaying the momentum and the result of the game in Colorado's favor. So be that as it may, the penalty kill just needs to be better, period. I would literally just take league average. That's all I'm asking for. League average penalty kill, league average power play. You can probably get away with a lot more having both of those in tow. But the Jets haven't really gotten anywhere near that. So some stuff for the future, and obviously a lot of players perhaps on the move after this season. But, you know, at the end of the day, let's just hope that this playoff run goes relatively deep. I don't want this to be, the last round we have with Rick. I think it'd be nice if he can make a repeat appearance as a cup finalist and maybe even get himself a ring. The guy's been around for longer than I've been alive, and he's had some amazing runs with some great teams. It'd be nice if maybe he gets rewarded for one of them. He's been around the game long enough to have seen, crazy stuff throughout his career. And if this is his final season behind the bench for any team, really, then let's make it a memorable one. I think that would be a really good sending off and a great cap to what has been a really impressive career. But, for the future, I think the Jets definitely need to look at somebody who's a little more comfortable relying on the youth, somebody who's willing to maybe make some waves with the roster. I hate to say it, but I feel like Bones kind of got trapped a little bit with some of Mark Scheifele's demands or decisions, and maybe it's time to change that up. Maybe somebody who's got a really firm voice and is willing to kind of take the reins a little bit more aggressively. Maybe that's what's needed, right? A more progressively minded coach, somebody who favors a little bit more of an offensive style. I think Rick's done a phenomenal job of coaching this team's overall defensive structure to making the team a really stingy unit. But I think the Jets of the future are probably going to have to rely more on goal scoring. Offense over the past 5 or 10 years just keeps going up. I mean, this year we've seen some of the highest scoring from players that we've ever seen in the modern era. And the Jets don't really have that kind of star power, or they're not built that way either. That's where I think the Jets need to really make some changes and kind of get themselves to play more like Colorado, because that's the future of the league. The game's getting faster. There's lots of skill. Teams are kind of figuring out that you can also have size while being skilled and fast, but it's the challenge of figuring out which of those prospects are likely to make that sort of jump to the NHL. So lots of stuff for the Jets to consider, but look, regardless of how this year ends, I do think next season has some really interesting promise. Brad Lambert's going to be here. Rucker McGroarty might be there after his college season ends. You've got Chibrikov, who looks like he could be a real gem. Salamonson might be in North America at this point. And if Heinola's ankle holds up, he might be a really nice puck mover on your second or third pairing. So there's a lot of stuff to be excited about, but the Jets definitely need to get through this first playoff run and see how it all goes for next year. But let me know what you think of all of this. Drop your thoughts and comments below. Give me your game score prediction. I've given some bad ones recently, but I'm still going to do it anyways. I'll say 4-3 Jets. We'll see how it goes. Let me know how you're feeling in the comments or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. But for tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. Tune back in on Monday to hear how the Jets did in Game 4 of the Stanley Cup playoffs against Colorado. But for tonight's episode, that's all the time that we have. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.